In our session here, we're going to be going through a lot of material that's quite familiar with me. So I do encourage you to please ask questions as we're going here. Please utilize that chat we were using yesterday or use the Q&A afterwards. I'll first kind of get started here in a moment by talking about who I am and why I'm talking to you about this. And then bulk of our focus will be using Caffarel and Daffron's interactive model of instructional design and kind of applying that, mapping that over a few different game approaches. And then from there, we'll kind of have our Q&A, and I want to encourage anybody who might be an educator or gamer or anyone in between to ask questions of, hey, maybe I have an idea of a game I want to design, a lesson I want to design, or even better yet, even if you aren't designing games or instruction yourself, I have no doubt that you are learning things, whether you want to or not, officially or unofficially, and certainly by the nature of being here, you probably play some form of game. So by understanding a bit more about how we design these things, it can even enhance our own experience as just a player or learner. I have a bit of a weird resume because I like to joke that I am, playing with my career quite a bit. My main focus right now is in what's called industrial organizational psychology. For short, I just say work science. And I do a lot of research in learning development, simulation, assessment, and gamification. More specifically, I have been teaching at the University of Hartford since about 2018 in their master's program for organizational psychology, again, focusing on training, personnel, and experimental design. I'm also a recent PhD student over at Illinois Institute of Technology for the last 2 years, so I have been doing things a bit out of order, as many of us may have had a lot of fun or frustration or both doing in games, doing things out of order. Outside of that, I have a few other engagements as well. I do virtual classroom production, or I'd say Zoom lifeguard to help with tech on some professional training delivery, and I do some coaching and consulting for another firm. But beyond that, you've probably seen or heard my name around for different Ozymandias Project endeavors. I do a lot of editing for the Agent Office Hours podcast and helped put on this conference. What I'm most proud of recently is I am officially, my title is Business Wizard for Heavy Thought Studios and their upcoming title, The Office Type, which is a dating sim about office supplies. So TLDR here, I play around when it comes to work and school. And when it comes to games, I work hard at the games I play and the games I want to play. So just a bit of a show here of I'm not just all busy professionally, but I like to do a lot of fun with games as well, and everything in between. So to get our focus really started here, I want to ask you all, what's your game? The reality is that design starts and really never ends by a process of asking questions. Are we playing a game to win? Are we playing a game to make friends, to have fun? Ask yourself, what games did you start with? So if you identify as a gamer or not, what are perhaps some early games you played? And these don't have to just be video games or board games. This could be things like tag or charades or play pretend or whatever else. But think about where you started from and how that may have influenced where you are today, even if your preference for games is much different than where you started. And similarly, we can start to do the same thing about what sort of teaching and learning were you exposed to when you were young? What are the lessons that stuck with you, good and bad? I'm sure we've all had bad instructors or bad trainings in our experience here, and that's certainly influenced where we want to go. Now, one big question I want you to continue thinking about as we go through this presentation and really afterwards is this idea that can we have fun while losing? And this is usually a good hallmark of quality game design. If I can have a lot of fun while I'm still maybe not winning. We've all probably experienced games like Monopoly, where if you're not winning, you're probably having a pretty bad time. And surprise, surprise, not a lot of people like playing Monopoly. But on the other hand, if we think about a game like Mario Kart, for instance, intentionally designed to have all different player types and different skill levels, or depending on who you play with, maybe different sobriety levels, depending on the social event. But regardless of if you're winning or not, you can still have quite a bit of fun. Likewise, when it comes to learning, are people learning maybe the intended goal you have for your lesson, or are they perhaps learning other things? And by taking this lens, we can really start to consider, what are we actually designing for? Are we designing for some of the future of what we want to do? Are we designing for this grand idea we have? And maybe that is the case, though realistically, a lot of times we will start a design for lesson plans, for games, by trying to address past problems. We might say, these platformers are all fine, but I want something that has more speed. I need something that can really compete with the big Marios out there. That's how we get Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, of course, there's a lot more nuance that goes into that development process, but simply going after fixing problems isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's realistically, authentically, what a lot of our motivation could be. Now, as I've kind of injected all these questions into your brain, I want to next transition to setting some realistic expectations. Depending on your experience, instructional design might feel like you're simply putting content and pieces together. It might seem like everything has to be color-coded, done in a certain way. It may even seem like there's only a certain number of correct moves you can make. And even when you do, it can take a while to really get things into place. And you can feel that progress, but then you're right back at the start. Other times, it can feel a bit more hectic, like something you might find in a Helldiver's type game. You might be rushing to go and complete your tasks, get interrupted, boost yourself up with some caffeine, go back, and then you are still in the fight even after you complete every task. We might feel somewhere between the two of these different samples. This is where we enter what I call the interactive model, or more importantly, what Caparella and Daffron call the interactive model. This is a model that's been around for quite some time. Since I believe the 80s was the original publication. And it has a bunch of different components. And we'll see in this kind of flower diagram, there's a lot of different concepts we're being exposed to. On the outside, we see change, culture, power, global problems, stakeholders. All those are things that we really can't control, almost like the soil for a flower, but certainly fuel it, feed it, kind of determine where it goes. But on the outside petals, we see some other big things that maybe we do have a better idea of. Less control, but we can at least define and be part of that conversation. Sometimes we don't set our context, but we can at least clarify where that is. When it comes to evaluation for a program, we may not always be able to define that fully ourselves. We have other stakeholders we have to work with. And as we get a bit further in, we get into more things that we can control. And at the very core, we can actually consider what are the big things that might shine out and really influence what's on the outer border, but also consider our own personal elements. What are our personal ethics? What are our personal politics, social justice ideas? Those can kind of almost live in their own bubble, but can also add a little bit as we fully blossom this flower of whatever program we're designing. So to set our focus for the remainder of this talk here, I'll be going through kind of six main areas, and followed by Q&A of Caparella and Daffron's interactive model. So just from that diagram we saw there, the first being context, support, and stakeholders. How do we work with those? How do we set our goals and objectives? What are different instructional techniques or methods? Evaluation, budget and ROI, and then finishing up with some contingencies and logistics. And what we'll find here in a moment is that a lot of these things may have some pretty intuitive direct connections. Budget and ROI, for instance, you're going to need a budget for doing any sort of learning program, and you're going to need a budget for any sort of game design as well. But we'll get a little bit more of the nuance of how those differ and how those can converge. We also might find that there's some things that may not seem as directly transferable, but as we dig into them, they actually are. We just need to relabel things a bit. So before we start anything, we should always be asking ourselves a needs assessment. What it is that we are doing here? What is the problem we're trying to solve? Or what is the value we are trying to create? When we are trying to teach something, that's very often, what is the information I want people to know? Seems straightforward, but as we know in practice, that can be a lot harder. Again, even if you haven't done any instructional design yourself, odds are you have taken a training or lesson, whether or not you wanted to, and you may have wondered, what am I doing here? And perhaps an instructor didn't even consider that. That's why that training wasn't so much. But on the game side, we also have to ask ourselves these same questions. Needs assessment can take all sorts of forms. It can be doing focus groups or interviews like we see here from the film office space. It can be doing surveys. It can be a lot more informal things like simply asking people to raise their hands. But what does this have to do with games? Well, with games, we actually do a lot of this, we just don't call it the same thing. In fact, matchmaking is a very common way of doing a needs assessment for players in a game. This is a screenshot from Fortnite, and it has a bit of extra annotation there to see a little bit more about what all these different options are. And when we first get into things, this can be very overwhelming. There's a lot of customization, a lot of options we have here. And here we'll see, all right, what maps do we want to play? How many rounds per map? What modes? What buildings? What other settings do we want to have? Score limit, number of teams. I can customize things even further than that. Figure out what players I'm going to have. Figure out who's ready to even play. It's a lot. And ultimately, as a designer, this is the level you're going to be trying to work towards, ultimately. Before you can have this wide menu of options, keep in mind what it took to get there. Again, this is from Fortnite. They've had many years to develop, and they're not doing it from scratch. In fact, very often they're developing these settings based off of what other games people play. So then we can take a step back and consider, what is it that we are doing here? At a high level, Fortnite is a battle royale shooter game. Already settling just those details can slot us into a lot more of what it is we actually want to do with all of this. From there, it's really a matter of refining things. So turn this on to more of the lesson side. What are the things that we are trying to teach? Is this more of a safety training? Is this more of a compliance training? Are we trying to have a history lesson? Even if we're trying to do something different that people don't expect, and we might have very good reasons to do so, we need to understand what are people expecting before they even go into this, and what sort of problems are we trying to address, and which ones might we encounter. So we'll try to maybe build towards this level of detail ultimately, but realistically, many even players will never go into this level of detail or customization. All they're going to really care about is this big old button at the bottom right that says play. And you've probably seen versions of quick play in any sort of matchmaking game before as well. People don't have to think about things too much. And in fact, to even understand half of these settings, you won't know until you've played a few games or even simply watched somebody else play their game. And this is where it comes to context, stakeholders, and support. We have to involve other people. Knowing your audience is a big part of this, and a bunch of different stakeholders may be coming into play. These can be people who either are, if not directly participating in our training, in our game, they do influence things. For instance, who approves the budget? Who is helping us with marketing? Who is helping us co-design it? And who ultimately is impacted? And for that, this is where we have to understand, are we actually trying to figure out where the expertise is? What do people actually know? Try to work with our audience. Well, for that, we may have to, if we're doing a DISC training and we're trying to apply it to dogs, understand the difference between a DISC assessment, for those who are familiar with the coaching and personality assessment of DISC, or as dogs would understand it, maybe something a little bit different. And we also find that balance between those misunderstandings and simply telling and shoveling information to people as if we are an expert witness. When it comes to designing your game, your lesson, I want you to play with these ideas. Figure out, all right, where can I maybe find the difference between simply, all right, do I have to teach a dog how to play Frisbee? Well, odds are they either will instinctively get it or not. But what they do with that Frisbee beyond just catch it and return it, we can practice that. It's actually not the matter of knowledge they need to have, but maybe the experience. Perhaps we know that a dog can easily pick up a Frisbee, but actually bring it back to us or dropping it is the harder part. Likewise, when it comes to instructional design, ask yourself, am I simply trying to understand that they need to get the Frisbee? needed to get the content, or is it more about practicing what they do with it? And I offer this up because very often instructional design will lean towards this right-hand side here of trying to be an expert with this, trying to tell the uninformed, believe me, here's everything you need to know, but ultimately the decision's up to you. And of course, the more natural approach. We want to balance these things. And odds are we won't always be the expert in what it is that we're trying to design for. But we're trying to design complicated things, and we're going to be working on teams, which is where it can be helpful to know our SMEs, our subject matter experts, from our Smees. You're familiar with Peter Pan. She is the first mate of Captain Hook, and very well known for saying aye, aye, sir, agreeing, and basically telling Captain Hook what he wants all the time, even when there might be danger of an alligator lurking right around the corner. Now, the reason I bring this up is it's important to work with subject matter experts that are going to tell us the difficult things. If you find that everyone is always agreeing with you, not asking too many questions, this may be a sign that we need to diversify who we're asking for expertise and help. And again, this goes back and forth, but when we're designing for a game, when we're designing for instruction, it really does help to have a balance of people who will tell us what their expertise is, but also ask us questions, push back. And at the same token, many of you probably won't be designers in your day-to-day, but can be impacted by this. So ask yourself, can you be a subject matter expert? Or sometimes maybe you just need to be a SME. Maybe you do need to build the confidence of someone else. But as we look at a broader array of stakeholders, these things together can really help show us how the whole thing gets made. So next, we can go and take a look at our goals and objectives. I'll hit this part a lot harder than some of the others, simply because when it comes to teaching, when it comes to game design, when it comes to business and virtually anything, goals and objectives are important. They're also notoriously difficult, and many people are bad at them. Even those who might consider themselves a SME in them may really just say that because they're more of a SME and people agree with goals and objectives without actually trying to follow up on them later on. So with that in mind, games and learning really do rely on having both structured and understood goals and objectives. And a bit later on, we'll go into some quick examples of good and bad goals and why we might be able to identify those as such. High level, our goals and objectives need to be addressing both program level and learner levels. So on the program level, what that means is, what am I trying to do with this lesson? What am I trying to do with this entire course I'm teaching? Likewise, with the game, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to make money? Am I trying to make an art game? Am I trying to convey a certain historical period? The story we tell can really come out of what goals and objectives we set, and likewise, how we communicate different goals and objectives to different stakeholders. The goal that we may have Ubisoft developing the next Assassin's Creed may be to certain definitions of market share or a different profit we're trying to drive. However, that's not what we're going to tell the player. We don't tell the player, you're here so we can make money. Now, if you're Ubisoft or some other studios, that might be a little bit more apparent. But on the other hand, I also could say as an indie dev, it's important to make money or value at some point too. And you have to balance that. How much of an art game are you making until you realize you haven't made anything and you've been behind on release for a while? So when it comes to designing these, we need to balance both looking at our program and learn objectives and know that we'll probably have to communicate those differently. And at the end of the day, consider what actually getting your goals done means versus how important is it to complete things on the way to achieving these goals. Very much in the same way when we consider, trying to finish off everything on our checklist for the day, whether it's in a game or not, and just enjoying the journey. I imagine some of you in the audience here have probably played something like a Stardew Valley or a Harvest Moon with a certain number of hours, minutes in the day. objectives to do, and you may be rushing to do everything until you collapse at the end of the night. Or perhaps you take things in a more organic, free-flowing way. I know people who've had entire spreadsheets to plan out the ideal week in Animal Crossing, and realistically, I know people who pop in every few months and just see, oh, there's a festival, oh, I just wanted to go fishing, forgot that there's this villager here. Designing effectively means that we're considering both different ends of the spectrum for what the learner, what the player might go through. So let's actually go ahead and get into developing some goals. To do this, it helps to use what's called SMART. And what this stands for, you may have heard some different variations over the years, but typically we have to start with specifics. Does the goal have the necessary details? Is it measurable? How do we measure progress towards a goal? Is the goal attainable? What actions or behavior facilitate this? Relevancy or realism, does it connect to our end motivation, why we're actually doing this? And lastly, is it time-based? What's the deadline? What's the time frame? Am I collecting 10 wolf pelts by the end of the day? Or is there no timeline at all? And how might that impact the actual completion of the goal? Let's go ahead and apply this to an example. Our goal is to outperform previous semesters and wow our donors. The objective of the Blackboard training is to make sure everyone's prepared and these lessons happen and keep accurate records. This is an example goal we might find in academia for teachers, trying to design lessons for their students, and we might get this from a dean or program chair telling us, hey, here's what we're trying to do. And this might sound pretty familiar, in part because it's maybe not the best goal. There are some obvious issues here. Using that SMART framework we just talked about, we want to avoid all or nothing goals. To say that we're trying to outperform previous semesters, either we outperform them or we don't. Yes or no. Generally, if we're trying to meet a goal, we want to do more than yes or no. We want to have an idea of how much we're outperforming or how much we're underperforming if we are. Likewise, there's no clear measures here. What does performance mean? What does wowing our donors mean? We even say the objective is to make sure everyone's prepared to make these lessons happen and keep accurate records. But what does making these lessons happen mean? What's our timeline here? Who does this goal really serve? Now, assuming this isn't that academic mindset, this is probably something that is just kind of distilled down from what perhaps administrators thinking of, and it makes clear sense to them. But clearly, as we kind of dissect this goal, it doesn't make much sense to the people who actually are the ones who are responsible for achieving it. And the reason I bring this all up is because, again, not all of you are going to be designers, but I guarantee you'll be affected by poorly constructed goals in a game, in a career, or elsewise. And I know what some of you might be thinking. This can be very formulaic. It can feel very Frenchy to go through all these things. What if we just kind of go more on self-paced learning? And that's totally valid. Some people definitely prefer some more immersive, self-led approaches. For instance, the Elder Scrolls game Morrowind is very well known for doing this. There's not a distinct quest log saying that you need to kill 10 goblins in the town of Cyrodiil, but instead we kind of have a narrative depiction of what's going on here. Starting off with the first day in the game, you have some orders, you talk about somebody you met, you return the little ring to them, kind of saying both the start and end of these quests in a more narrative format, and that can actually have a lot of merit. Now, this also does depend on who your learner, who your player is. It has some significant risks. For instance, this first quest here, we have to find Caius Casades in Belmora, and we need to figure out where he lives, so we have to ask around this local corner club. Well, Morrowind is a favorite game of mine, but it also has some significant pitfalls. For all, it's not uncommon to see something like this. On page 565 of the quest log, after 3 years, this player has found the first person in the main quest. Having this wide amount of flexibility can be a strength or an asset depending on what you're doing. In fact, this is what many PhD programs may be structured around. Writing a dissertation, You are basically dropped off on a boat in the middle of somewhere. It's a new place, and you're meant to do whatever adventure drives you. But without a bit more structure, you may only find out what you're doing way, way, way later. And I say this as somebody who's done quite a bit of side quests myself. So if you want to go the more organic, kind of self-led learner player route, you can, but consider the risks that are involved in doing so. We'll now transition over to another kind of revisit of some goals. And here you can see already there's a lot more detail going on. So Ozymandias University's Q3 2025 goal is to have 5% more enrollment compared to Q4 2024. Same Blackboard's analytic training we were talking about in their previous example is preparing, department chairs and advisors to use student performance data to facilitate office hours conversations. Much clearer on what they're trying to do. Chairs and advisors should have at least 2 conversations with students a month after this training. A portion of staff development funding is reserved for departments that can consistently increase enrollment by 6% or higher. Sounds like a much better goal, right? But we need to understand, what is it that we're actually doing here? And if we apply those same SMART principles, is it specific? Yes. Is it measurable? Yeah, we have 2 conversations, different percentage increases. Is it timely? Yes. But what we're missing is a bit of how actionable it is. We have some actions. We need to have conversations with students, okay? But beyond that, what are people doing? We don't really know. And is it relevant? Well, let's look at the top line of the goal here. We want to have 5% more enrollment. And this is a training on how to use Blackboard learning management system. Very similar to Canvas or Moodle or B2L if you use those. What's that have to do with enrollment? Well, I can maybe think that if students feel more supported, they're more likely to stay enrolled and not drop out. But a lot of enrollment typically is a bit more on attracting new people to the organization. Who actually even owns enrollment? Is that a responsibility of these department chairs and advisors? Or is that something more on the admission side? Likewise, we're trying to measure office hours conversations, but how important are those in determining enrollment? And really, we're tasked with having different office hours conversations, but that's primarily something that students have to show up for. And as both the student and instructor, I could say, not a ton of people use office hours as much as they should. A lot of people just are intimidated by them or don't use them for a variety of reasons. But ultimately, how responsible is an instructor or advisor in making sure that the office hours conversations happen? So I bring this up because this goal might at first glance seem really strong, but be skeptical and be prepared to kind of give some feedback. In reality, sometimes the simplest goals and objectives are the most effective. In fact, sometimes if you look at games, they can be straightforward, or they can be just one word: survive. And while that might seem obvious in most any game, it can help embolden and build in what they're trying to do. And this is still from the game Halo Reach. It's at the very end of the game, and it is, in fact, very engineered to have a certain player experience. The objective is to survive. That's what they're told is their mission, their quest. In reality, the player will face endless waves of enemies, and this is an impossible goal to fully achieve. They may be able to survive for longer. And in fact, the lack of guidance on this empowers the player to put more details on it. To survive, well, am I surviving for a minute? Am I trying to survive for 10 minutes? Am I trying to take out a certain number of enemies? Am I trying to do it with a certain weapon or in a certain way? Am I maybe playing with friends cooperatively? Having a clear, high-level goal and then giving people space to make their own goals is an important part of instructional design. It's not always just having all the right details to make sure you've checked all of your boxes, but ultimately, as much as we might tell people what their goals are, by giving people more space and freedom to make goals for themselves, we may find it's actually a much more enriching experience that we're actually trying to engineer. Moving over to our instructional techniques and methods, this is a pretty clear transfer actually over into games. It's gameplay. Are we doing an action game? Are we doing an idle game? Is this an RPG? Is this a driving game? Is this a sports game? Is this an FPS? Well, much in the same way, if I'm doing a lecture, if I'm doing a simulation, if I'm doing a role play, if I'm doing case-based learning, there's a lot of different methods I can use for instructional approaches. And likewise, there's a lot of different gameplay that can happen within the same game. So ask yourself, what experiences are you trying to craft? What levels of player or learner agency do you want to have? Is there a narrative perspective you want to have? Is it not just what people are doing, but the story they see over time? Well, I can tell story in different ways, and sometimes I can tell them a lot more easily depending on what sort of gameplay or instructional techniques I'm using. To tell people a story through lecture can be straightforward, but doesn't offer a lot of agency. And you may not need to, depending on what it is. Other times, we may need to have a lot more agency over people. So I compare the lectures, honestly, to something like a dating sim or a visual novel even. We can overwhelmingly control the narrative, maybe have a quick time event or two, but people are mostly just observing and absorbing the content with just minimal interaction. Other times, there's meant to be more back and forth. Do we want to tell the story through more competition? Well, maybe that's something that we have almost like a discussion or a debate in a class. We can have a more competitive element in our gameplay. All told, this is really just building us towards what sort of feedback loops do we want to have. So just like in a game, we may go out into the overworld, fight enemies, collect loot, sell them back to the town shop, upgrade our equipment, go back, grind some more, and repeat. It's not the only part of the game, but it's a core gameplay loop. Likewise, when you're designing not just one lesson, but perhaps an entire class or training program, what gameplay loops are you creating? What are people already expecting? What are they used to? And then if we build on that, how can we play on those tropes? Do they read a textbook, watch a lecture, write their discussion board, then repeat? Do your papers and projects serve as boss battles? And where have you maybe put in some secrets, some Easter eggs, some extra credit? Even if it's not necessary, you might seed those in, and frankly, most players may not interact with it ever, but even hearing about it indirectly, saying, oh, there was this little Easter egg. In the syllabus, if you read closely, you can get a few extra credit points. If you look at the other extra credit assignment, it's an optional mission, but you might do it just to get the reward, or might just do it for the experience. Overall, we have to consider what are the expectations, but also what were we trying to get as far as our outcomes. And realistically, we're not going to just use one type of gameplay only. Even your classic FPS shooters or Call of Duties are going to incorporate a few different other gameplay mechanics more than just shoot, 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 shoot. They'll have different navigations, different puzzles, different other interactions because they're trying to craft a different experience that has a bit more layers to it. And this is where we can shift into our evaluation mindset. Now, something I will teach my students all the time is Kirkpatrick's 4-level evaluation model. I'm also obliged to note that Kirkpatrick's evaluation model isn't entirely Kirkpatrick's. He has definitely taken it from a number of different authors over the years, so I will shamelessly take it from him as well. But at a high level, what this does is look at 4 key levels to evaluate learning impacts. Number one we're probably most familiar with, is reaction. How well did the learners like the learning process? Likewise for gaming. How much do people like the game? What are the reviews we're getting? As far as learning, what do they actually learn? What's the knowledge they have? Now, this one is a bit trickier to get into the game space, but how do they understand the game? Do I understand as a game about aliens, tactics, strategy, or is it more about building my team? Well, You can evaluate what you want them to know about your game, but also try to be prepared to figure out where people might diverge from those expectations. For the game design side, this is probably less relevant, but on the learning side, this is also most relevant. On the behavior side, this is something that we can definitely cross over on both scenarios. But what changes in job performance, what changes in student behavior, what changes in gameplay behavior are we trying to get by taking a certain approach? When I design a game, what do I want people to do? Do I want them to try and get the most kills or most points in any way possible? Do I want them to be working together as a team? Do I want them to be strategizing? And finally, results. What are the metrics we're tracking? What are we getting out of this? And thinking beyond just the meta of the game, what are we doing with the actual outcomes of releasing a game? Are we trying to make money? Are we trying to make an impact as far as awareness? Are we trying to talk about a societal conversation through this? Again, think about how an art game might do things differently from a AAA game. So to kind of put this into practical context, I like to use this example with my students from the film Star Wars. Spoilers, if you've not seen The Empire Strikes Back, it had 45 years. Spoil it for you. We can take a look at this famous scene of Darth Vader confronting Luke Skywalker in Bespin City. And using these same levels of evaluation, how was the learner engaged? Did they like it? What does our learner know after completing this training? What behaviors do the learners stop, start, or continue? And what measurable impacts or consequences are from this? Here, at a high level, Luke learns that Darth Vader is his father. That's the intended lesson. Luke's the learner, Darth Vader is the instructor. Well, level 1, Luke does not enjoy this lesson. He has a bad reaction. To quote the film, no, that's impossible, that can't be true. A bad reaction. Now, on the knowledge level, we do kind of get that across. Luke gets the information that was presented to him. But on the behavior side, he rejects it. And furthermore, he rejects the offer for Darth Vader to rule the galaxy with him, or his role as a father. So even if the knowledge is conveyed, people know what the game is. You've conveyed the rules very clearly, the game premise is there, but they don't actually play in the way that you want them to. They know how to play. They know that they need to go and continue to turn left on the racetrack, but they've decided to turn around and go and turn right and enter into a demolition derby. The behavior might be different. And the results. Well, here in the film, Luke drops down that air shaft and escapes with the Millennium Falcon. Quite the opposite of what the instructor Darth Vader was. But in the later film, Return of the Jedi, we can take another scene and see how that does for a different but similar learning lesson. Here, Luke learns who Anakin Skywalker or Darth Vader really was. So let's apply those same questions. On the reaction level, Luke was certainly engaged. Did he enjoy it? Ultimately, yes. He found this a very important part to understand who his father was. What knowledge? Well, he doesn't just accept that Darth Vader was his father, but that he was this person, Anakin Skywalker, before he became Darth Vader, and that he was transformed to the dark side, and eventually from the dark side at the very climax of the film. Behavior. Luke accepts his father, and this takes a minute. There's bewilderment, there's confusion, there's him taking the mask off to see his face. And ultimately, the behavior that this drives is him trying to save him from the Death Star before Darth Vader has to tell him, no, please leave me. And the result is, Darth Vader returns to the light side of the Force. He becomes a Force ghost at the very end. So overall, we could say 2 very similar approaches to the same lesson here, but much different ways we can evaluate them, even if we were trying to design it that same way. Now, budget and return on investment, or ROI, it's obvious to say design and development cost money. We have to figure out what our fixed costs are. What are we paying for one time? Do I have to buy a computer? Do I have to buy a device, buy a license for something? What are more variable costs? Am I paying for more servers as more people play my game? Do I have to get more desks as more students come into my classroom? And when we draw these budgets, it can be tempting to try and put everything into one big pot, but we want to be careful that we don't do that immediately, because otherwise we can get overwhelmed and may even overwhelm those who are asking for resources. We also have to acknowledge that budgets are more than just money. Time is so vital, and for any indie game developers out there, you might be working with very little to no money, but you certainly are using quite a bit of time and energy. And end of the day, something that people very often will forget about and need to be reminded of, myself included, is why and how your design is worth it. Whether it's a lesson or a game, what's the return? What makes it worth it? It's going to spend a lot of time, money, and energy to make a game or make a lesson. I may not get a ton of money back, but I may get a lot of energy back. I might be saving people time and presenting with new opportunities as a result of this. And that can happen in both the short and the long term. As a general guideline, we want to make sure that we understand we are capping our budget. And here this means cash flows and confidence. What money do I have coming into my project? What resources do I have coming in? And taking a step beyond just the money part, what's my time like? Do I only have a few hours every week to commit to lesson planning? How confident am I at the start? What am I confident about? Am I very certain that even if I'm not sure how I'm going to teach this lesson, I know I'm going to teach my students about the War of the Roses? Accounting and accountability. How do I track payments in and out? On the money side, this is actual accounting, but on the time, the energy side, what sort of investments am I asking of my learners, of my players? How much do they have to spend in the tutorial doing the pre-reading before they can come to the real lesson, the main gameplay? And preparations and pivots, what's essential? Do I need to have the 14 different hats and skins for my game? Do I need to have all these different gameplay options? Or at the heart of it, I really just need people to fight this giant Hydra monster to experience what it's like to go through that in a mythological sense from Hercules. What can be cut? What's flexible? What can you adjust? Does it need to be a Hydra, or does it need to be somebody else from the other labor's challenges? So a lot of few kind of different options we can have here. And being cognizant of time, I'll be moving rather quickly here, but be straightforward as well. At the end of the day, we have to understand what the consequences of not meeting certain deadlines are. If I'm not at the bus stop by the time the bus shows up, I will miss the bus. We have to prepare for things to go wrong. I encourage you, please build in flex time. Try to insulate things from risk, not just in your lesson plans, but in your games. This is why we have tips and jokes and other interactions on loading screens. It gives us time to not only physically process the thing on the digital side, but also give our players, our learners, a chance to process themselves, get them ready. We might get bored going into something on a loading screen, but that can actually be vital for us getting our assignment ready to actually do something, to hear whatever the next thing is. We try to evaluate as things happen. So when we first kind of have some players do some beta testing, or even when we launch, whether that's our game or our lesson, we want to try and take notes of it, but also understand that we'll probably have to do an after action report later on. There's certain realities you just have to accept as we go and adjust accordingly. But this is why we need to go back, why we spend so much time on setting our goals and objectives, to understand what is most important to us. So returning back to that original model we have, the Caffarel and Daffron's interactive model, there's a lot that can go into instructional design and game design. All these parts, though, can overlap and support each other. And when we start, we may have a number of these things laid out for us. We may know ahead of time the clear schedule, clear goals and objectives, but how we do it is up to us. And as we get more into our design process, we might have some more questions outstanding, but the more we can fill out this flower, the more we can understand how everything goes together and supports each other. So that is going to bring us to the end of my formal presentation here. I know we have a little bit of time here for some quick Q&A. So thank you all for for attending this lecture. Hopefully I can get some more discussion going forward here and have some different gameplay types, because I want to do more than just lecture. I think I'm seeing a question from Chelsea.
Hi, so I'm here to just remind everyone that you can line up in this Q&A line right behind me. You have to be in this little square that I'm standing in to ask a question. Whoops, to ask a question, you have to be in this little square. So keep that in mind. But yeah, thank you so much. And looks like we have people questioning, deciding whether they want to get in line.
Comments are welcome too.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a question. If you just want to add to the conversation, you are totally welcome to do that. I'm gonna get out of the way.
Hi there. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. Hello, mate.
Excellent. So, really good topic. I thought that was super interesting. But at one point, you were mentioning the Elder Scrolls, and that reminded me that I still need to download Oblivion. Have you played Oblivion? Are you going to play Oblivion?
Great question. I have not played the remake yet. I shockingly have had a battle between Baldur's Gate and my grad program. And to my own surprise, grad program has been waiting. I played the original Oblivion when it came out. And in fact, fun bit here. I actually cited Oblivion in my 7th grade science fair project in 2005 before it came out. And I just talked about the very realistic graphics and physics at the time. I'm seeing the page in the spotlight, but I'm not hearing you.
I couldn't find the button to turn on my camera. Sorry.
I can see and hear you now.
There we go. No, my question is, you talked a lot about like setting the goals specifically for a game, especially in development. And I know that working with like a group of people to develop a game, it's always probably interesting trying to determine those goals in like a universal way. So I don't know if you have any tips on like how you would take a mixture of people that are trying to agree on those goals and aligning them at that point.
Yeah, great question. This is why I think it's important that before even defining goals and objectives, figure out what your game is. What is it that you're doing here? Am I making a party game? Am I making a competitive game? Is there a narrative I'm trying to convey? And same thing for your lessons. What are you actually trying to do? If they walk away, I always try to say like have like 2 sentences you can sum something up in. And I also often notice to presenters, have your parachute ready. So if you get cut off, if there's a fire alarm, if you only have like 30 seconds to put your entire presentation in, I can say, if you get nothing out of this presentation other than this, you should know that instructional design and games are playing with everyone's priorities in a way that keeps them all engaged, if not fully satisfied, but makes it feel like their time was worthwhile. That's an example of like what I want to get out of this presentation. Your question though, working with different people, you almost have to kind of do a little bit of meta work of, all right, some people might feel very passionate about very particular goals and doing the kind of toddler, okay, but why? Okay, then what? And really start to dig into what their real priorities are. Because people will have goals and those should be stated for everyone to mutually agree upon. But identifying people's different priorities can be hard and it can take a lot of back and forth. And sometimes the process of asking about both of them will make people realize their own priorities that they weren't even aware of. I will often joke as a game dev that like I started this because I wanted to write, and that's true. And I then started to do a lot more strategic and admin things because I selfishly want to have more feedback from more people on the game I wrote, and everything else is serving that. I've ultimately said, hey, we need to have more queer games, more narrative, more weird art stuff, but everything is supportive of my selfish. I want people to read my writing. And that's a bit of a vulnerable space to get to. It took some time, but it is an important conversation now with collaborators, whether it's learning or behavior. Were there any other questions? Well, seeing none, I want to thank you all for your questions then and your attention in this presentation. And yeah, I had a very fun time doing this, and hopefully it was somewhat engaging for the rest of you as well.